You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing that.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist
I'm
is
denying that
dangerous.
trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get pregnant.
So you are denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this, where
No,
they're told that they're opening up people to violence?
We have a good time in my class. You should join.
Oh, I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this exchange.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary. Ms. Hodge, I want to ask you about an article that you wrote for Bloomberg about affirmative action in universities. You argued that opposition to race-based affirmative action, I'm going to quote you now, is rooted in part in the belief that racism and systems that imposed barriers based on race in American society no longer exist, end quote. I had been under the impression that the argument was actually the opposite, that race-based affirmative action imposes race-based barriers on particular racial groups. Now, your article was about the Harvard case, so I take it you're familiar with that case. Is that fair to say?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Yes, I was writing an article following the decision that was made by the First Circuit in that particular piece of Bloomberg.
Gotcha. So the court documents, court filings from that case, from the Harvard case, state that, quoting now, Asian Americans needed SAT scores that were 140 points higher than white students, all other quantifiable variables being equal, to get into these elite schools. The same court filings also show that Asian American students who had the same score as African American students were about 25% likely to get into Harvard, whereas the African American student was 95% likely to get into Harvard. So basically, what the documents show is, and I don't know if there's much dispute about this, that Asian Americans are systemically discriminated against with these race-based policies. That's a problem, don't you think?
Senator, I will say, and thank you for the question, I'm not intimately familiar with the entirety of the report or all of the information that's contained in it. I know it is cited in the case. However, I would say that with the case that was before the court and currently now is on certiorari and coming before the Supreme Court, that the issue of race as a factor in admissions and utilized in universities is obviously what's going to be contemplated by the court, and understanding that the strict scrutiny standard is applicable. It would be a determination as to whether or not there's a compelling governmental interest, and if it's narrowly tailored to afford that interest for all who are asserting the argument.
Yeah, but is it a problem? I guess my question is it a problem for universities to make it harder for members of a certain race to be admitted to their university, to do it deliberately? Is that a problem? That's what your article's about. I'm asking, you've expressed an opinion on this, so I'm just asking about your opinion. Don't you think that's a problem?
Senator, thank you for the question. The article was written in the context of really providing, in essence, a procedural roadmap of what had transpired.
Yeah, but you expressed, though, I'm sorry to interrupt you, it's just I've got so little time, and I have the article in front of me. I enjoyed reading it. But you express your personal views, which is fine, by the way. I'm just asking about them. Your personal views on this case, and you say that the arguments of those who are arguing against Harvard's policies are actually anti-diversity. You say that they fail to overcome a principle that's of paramount importance to the country. I'm quoting you now, diversity matters, and its value is immeasurable, especially in education. I'm just asking you whether or not having Asian Americans present and able to be admitted on a fair basis with members of other racial groups, if that isn't, in fact, an interest that serves diversity. I mean, don't you think that that's important?
Senator Hawley, to your question, and thank you again for it, what has been stated by the court through years of dialogue and deliberation over this specific issue of affirmative action is that diversity matters
And does that include for Asian Americans?
for everyone.
And that's your personal opinion, too.
I'm stating based upon how the court has, I'm not putting my personal opinion. I believe that if I'm so fortunate to be confirmed to the district court, that my personal opinion would have no role in the deliberations that I would conduct. I would base all of my decisions on the facts presented, the arguments presented by counsel and or the individual litigants, as well as the law, and apply the law and precedent to whatever's presented to me.
But surely you could agree with the statement at this level of generality that deliberate discrimination against Asian Americans is wrong. Is that fair to say?
Senator Hawley, I say that discrimination is prohibited, and people who are discriminated against under the law, obviously, the work I also do in terms of employment discrimination, if someone is discriminated against based on a protected category, that is something that that's protected against under the Constitution.
But it's not wrong. I mean, you can't just say it's wrong. I'm trying to understand why you're splitting the hairs the way you're splitting them.
Senator, I'm not splitting hairs. Discrimination is illegal.
Judge Ali Khan, I think the last time you and I visited, it was before the Homeland Security Committee, and I asked you a number of questions there. You, including some for the record, you answered those, which I appreciated. One question that I ask you, and I ask every nominee actually on that committee and this one, is whether or not the nominee has ever litigated against a religious liberty claim. Usually the answer to that's no. In your case, you answered yes, and you listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different cases over a period of years, actually, in which you have litigated against individuals or churches' religious liberty claims. So let's just talk about a few of those, if we could. Let's start with some of your work during COVID. Case you list here, Capitol Hill Baptist Church versus Bowser. Do you remember that case?
Yes, Senator.
You remember working on that case?
Yes, Senator.
This was a case involving the district's lockdown policies that shut down churches in the district. Is that correct?
It concerned litigation over provision of the lockdown policies. The policies restricted all types of activity in the district.
All types of activity in the district?
Yes, Senator.
Did it restrict mass protests in the district?
Well, it restricted activities that one normally expected, including work, going to stores. It also did include these provisions that were challenged concerning churches.
So it exempted unusual or unlikely activities that's in the statute, that's in the ordinance?
When the mayor was enacting these orders at the outset of the pandemic, I think she was trying to be as comprehensive as she could, and the order did restrict a number of daily activities of district residents.
But it exempted mass protests?
I don't believe it said anything one way or another.
Can you point me to the text where it exempted mass protests?
I don't believe it said anything one way or another.
Of course it didn't, because it didn't exempt mass protests, right? You know that.
I think it was silent on the issue because I don't believe it was contemplated by the mayor's office.
Ah, so you think that mass protests should be in a different category than religious observances? Is that your position?
I think if there were protests on the book, then the mayor might have thought about that when she was enacting the COVID-19 restrictions. But I think she was trying to protect public health.
So you think it's fine to say to religious people that they are prohibited from gathering outside, wearing a mask, socially distanced. They can't do it. But if you want to come and protest, defund the police, if you want to support that, that's fine. You can gather en masse, person to person, close up, thousands of people. That's okay. That discrimination's okay. That was your position?
Senator, that is not my position.
It was your position. It's what you argued.
I did not write these orders. What I said.
You defended it in court. And you just articulated to me what I take to be your position.
What I was doing in a Capitol Hill Baptist Church was defending the mayor, my client, against a constitutional challenge to one aspect of the COVID-19 restrictions. We understood that strict scrutiny applies.
How did that case go for you?
We lost that case.
Why?
It was found that the restrictions did not meet the standard of strict scrutiny.
Meaning they were unconstitutional.
Meaning that they did not survive strict scrutiny, and it's a matter of public record that the District of Columbia did not appeal that decision.
Why? Why were they struck down?
Excuse me, Senator?
Why were the restrictions that you defended struck down as discriminatory? Why were they?
Because they did not satisfy.
Why didn't they?
The court concluded that there were restrictions that were not neutral of general applicability.
Yeah. That's legalese. Why didn't they? Why didn't they on the facts? You know the facts. You were a good lawyer. Why'd you lose?
We lost because applying the strict scrutiny test, the court concluded that the restrictions were not narrowly tailored to serve a compelling governmental interest.
Because?
Senator,
Oh, come on, Judge. Don't make me do this. Do you want me to go through it for you? You lost because Mayor Bowser was going to mass protests herself personally with thousands of people celebrating them. By the way, which is fine. We have First Amendment in the United States. I want to be clear. That is totally fine. You want to protest? Go for it. I think that's totally fine. That wasn't the problem here. At the same time she was doing that, she was prohibiting churches, religious people, from gathering socially distanced outside wearing masks. And the district court said, you can't do that. That's discrimination. You can't separate people out based on their ideological beliefs or their positions. You can't do that, right? Isn't that what the district court said?
the district court said that
Do you agree with it?
could not survive strict scrutiny.
For those reasons, right? Why are you fighting me on this? I can't figure this out.
I am not fighting you, Senator.
So yes, you agree. That's what the district court said.
That was what the district court concluded.
Do you think they got it right? The district court get it right?
The district court, we did not appeal that decision. I think that district court decision is consistent with rulings that we got from the Supreme Court clarifying the application of the religious test to COVID-19 restrictions in Tandon and the
Do you
Brooklyn
think
Archdiocese.
my time's almost expired, and I know other senators want to ask questions, so let me just very quickly here. Do you think it's wrong to discriminate on the basis of religious faith?
Absolutely, Senator.
Why did you argue that religious services, religious people pose a greater risk of infection than people gathered to argue for defunding the police?
I was representing my client. The mayor and consulting epidemiologists had issued orders that she thought were going to protect public health. It was my role to defend those as a
Why did you
member.
make that argument? That seems like a strange argument to me, that religious people are somehow, more infectious than folks who have other ideological positions? I don't get it.
My understanding was the nature of singing and other things epidemiologists thought could transmit COVID at a higher rate.
You didn't put any scientific evidence in the record for it?
Senator, those were fast-moving cases, and they weren't going to full briefing and full summary judgment with a record.
That's not what the district court said. The district court said that you engaged in, and your client engaged in, and you defended discrimination on the basis of religious belief, that you offered no scientific evidence for it, that you pressed these arguments over and over and over without any foundation. Frankly, I'm disappointed that you made those arguments. You can choose what arguments to make. I'm disappointed you made those arguments. I'm disappointed you persisted in defending them here today. And for that reason, among others, I will not support your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tillis. Thank you, Senator Hirono. We have Senator Hawley, Booker, and Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Coe, congratulations on your nomination. Let me just ask you a baseline question about the free exercise clause in the United States Constitution. Is it limited to houses of worship? Is it limited to the physical space of a house of worship?
No, it is not.
So I'm struggling to understand your opinion in the Tandon case. I don't understand why you would think that businesses should be able to abide or should be able to be open, and people should not be able to gather to worship in their own homes. Why would you assume that people gathering in their own homes wouldn't follow the guidelines, wouldn't obey the restrictions, and therefore couldn't be trusted? Help me understand that assumption. I don't quite get it.
On my part, it wasn't an assumption. That was the scientific evidence and the only evidence on that issue that was presented in the record.
Wait, it was scientific evidence that people of faith don't follow rules?
No, but that the risk of transmission is greater inside a private home than in a commercial entity that is regulated, that can be subject to criminal penalties. I recognize...
Wait a minute.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but your opinion says, under the state's restrictions, commercial environments require masking and social distancing, a requirement that can be enforced by commercial workers. On the other hand, at plaintiffs' gatherings, it is uncertain whether participants in these gatherings would maintain social distancing.
My order also mentioned that there are criminal penalties for not complying with the restrictions on commercial entities.
Right, so you assume that because of those, that commercial businesses will comply, but you assume religious believers would not comply. I'm just trying to understand why you disfavor religious believers in this way that seems very personal.
All I can say, Senator Hawley, is that I certainly have no animus toward any person of
Do you
faith.
think
I
maybe you have an
myself am a
implicit
person-
bias? Let me ask you this.
No, but-
in the
Go ahead,
2020
please.
Women's Collective Summit, you said last year that stereotypes are deeply embedded in many people. I'm quoting you now. And they may not even be aware that they're there. Do you think maybe that describes your view towards people of faith? I mean, has the Supreme Court's reversal of you maybe prompted you to confront some implicit biases you may have against people of faith?
I'm a person of faith, so I would have to be having a bias against my own.
So you're telling me
self
no?
and
The answer is no?
I do not believe that I am biased against people of faith. I'm a person of faith. My whole family is a family of faith.
Let me read you what the
But-
Supreme Court said about your reasoning. They said, you cannot assume the worst when people go to worship, but assume the best when people go to work. Why did you assume the worst when people go to worship?
I did not assume the worst.
So they're wrong about that.
No, I'm just saying that at the time, I looked at the evidence before me, and I looked at the Ninth Circuit precedent at the time, which was you're supposed to look through these 7 factors about increased risk of transmission. And that's the precedent I followed. I completely will fully, faithfully, fairly, in every case going forward, adopt all 4 of the holdings that the Supreme Court made and clarified and tended. And I understand you cannot assume the worst of people as they go to worship.
But you think the
and when they
Supreme
go to
Court
work.
misdescribed your opinion in this regard when they said the state cannot assume the worst when people go to worship, but assume the best when people go to work? You think that's a misdescription?
I understand that's the law, and that is what I'm going to follow. I certainly had no intent to do that. At the time, I was following existing Ninth Circuit precedent and looking at risk of transmission and making findings based on the record, which is what I understand to be my job. I understand now that comparability has to be assessed in a different way. I understand that what the rule is on the narrow tailoring for strict scrutiny analysis. I understand how you look at what is neutral and generally applicable. All of that clarification, I really appreciate. I did not have it at the time when I issued that ruling, but I will fully, faithfully, and fairly follow that going forward.
Well, all I can say is that I'm concerned about the tone of your opinion. I'm concerned about the assumptions that underlie it. I think the Supreme Court's reversal of it was quite significant. And I think the assumptions that people of faith can't be trusted, but people who go to strip clubs, as Senator Kennedy said, can be, is frankly pernicious and something that's worth further examination. And for those reasons, among others, I can't support your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Booker.
General Miller, let me come to you. Can you help me with something here? Anderson Air Force Base, I understand, this is in Guam, of course. Leaders there recently received an official email that prohibited them from using pronouns or descriptors like he, she, youngest, oldest, male, or female. Why is that? I mean, what's going on?
Senator Hawley, thank you for that question. Actually, that is, we've been talking a lot about that because it was an email, from my understanding, that went out locally from one of the commanders there, and I don't remember at what level. I don't know if it was a group commander or the wing commander there. I believe that it was a Facebook post that went out based on a question. It is not the Air Force policy to not use pronouns. And so I think it was a social media, exacerbated by individuals that said that they were directed for that.
Okay, good. Well, I think that's progress. So you're saying, I'm looking at a news article here published August 31, 2022, saying that PACAF has sent this letter around. Leaders of the base are instructed, do not use pronouns, age, race, etc. And they go on. The unauthorized examples of unauthorized language are male, female, youngest, oldest, he, she. But you're saying that was not an official communication. That has not been a directive.
That is not an official communication from the HAF. Correct.
Okay. And so your position to me is today that is not policy and that they have not been so instructed.
That is
This
correct.
is
That
a
is- that is
social
not
media
policy.
kerfuffle. I mean, this is not real. It's not happening.
It's, I don't know if it's not happening, but it is not an official policy from the Department of the Air Force.
Okay. I ask because part of the way it's been reported is that the rationale is to help with lethality and also recruiting. And it was curious as heck how not using he, she can help with lethality and how it's helping with recruiting. Ms. Monaco, I want to come back to this extraordinary letter and memorandum that the Attorney General of the United States issued yesterday. Practically every day brings new reports about this administration weaponizing the federal bureaucracy to go after political opponents. Frankly, I don't think we've ever seen anything like it in American history. I mean, for those of us who missed the McCarthy era, I guess this president is intent on bringing it to us, but with new force and new power and new urgency, unlike anything we've ever seen. Are you aware of any time in American history when an attorney general has directed the FBI to begin to intervene in school board meetings, local school board meetings?
I'm not aware, and I'm not aware that is not going on. Let me be very,
Really,
very
this
clear.
isn't about local school board meetings? That's not the subject of the memorandum? I thought that was in the memorandum.
The memorandum is quite clear. It's one page, and it asks the U.S. attorney community and the FBI special agents in charge to convene state and local law enforcement partners to ensure that there's an open line of communication to address threats, to address violence, and that's the appropriate role of the Department of Justice to make sure that we are addressing criminal conduct and violence.
At local school board meetings, let me just ask you this. Is parents waiting sometimes for hours to speak at a local school board meeting to express concerns about critical race theory or the masking of their students, particularly young children? Is that in and of itself, is that harassment and intimidation? Is waiting to express one's view at a school board meeting harassment and intimidation?
As the Attorney General's memorandum made quite clear, spirited debate is welcome, is a hallmark of this country. It's something we all should engage in. And
No, I don't
be
think so,
free
Ms.
to
Monaco. With
engage
all
in.
due respect, it didn't make it quite clear. It doesn't define those terms, nor does it define harassment or intimidation. It talks about violence. I think we can agree that violence shouldn't be condoned or looked aside from in any way, swept under the rug at all. But harassment and intimidation, what did those terms mean in the context of a local school board meeting? I mean, this seems to, in the First Amendment context, we talk about the chill to speech. If this isn't a deliberate attempt to chill parents from showing up at school board meetings for their elected school boards, I don't know what is. I mean, I'm not aware of anything like this in American history. We're talking about the FBI. You're using the FBI to intervene in school board meetings. That's extraordinary.
Senator, I have to respectfully disagree. That is not what
Point me to an instance.
the Attorney General's memorandum made quite clear that violence is not appropriate. Spirited public debate on a whole range of issues is absolutely what this country is all about.
Then why is it
When
being
and if-
investigated by
when
the
and if-
FBI?
It is not. When and if any situation turns to violence, then that is the appropriate role of law enforcement to address it.
Oh, no, the memorandum covers more than violence. It talks about intimidation. It talks about harassment. So I'm asking you to draw some lines. We do this all the time in the First Amendment context. This is the sum and substance of First Amendment law. So I expect that you'll be available and willing to do it now. Tell me where the line is with parents expressing their concerns, waiting for hours in these school board meetings. We've all seen the videos. This happened in my state. Parents have waited for hours. Sometimes the school board meetings have been ended before they can speak because the school board doesn't want to hear it. And now parents are told that if they wait and they express their views, that they may be investigated for intimidation?
I don't know who's telling them that, Senator. The job of the Justice Department is to investigate crimes. When a situation turns to violence, when and if a situation turns to violence, it's the job of the Justice Department and local law enforcement to address that. The Attorney General's memorandum simply asked the U.S. Attorney community, the FBI, and their counterparts to ensure that state and local law enforcement has an open line of communication to report threats, whether they happen in the context of election officials being threatened, whether they happen in the context of members of Congress being threatened, which the FBI responds to on a regular basis, as is appropriate. The job of the Justice Department is to address criminal conduct.
You know, all I can say is this is truly extraordinary. I think you know it is. It's unprecedented. You can't point to a single instance where anything like this has happened before. And I think parents across this country are going to be stunned to learn, stunned, that if they show up at a local school board meeting, by the way, where they have the right to appear and be heard, where they have the right to say something about their children's education, where they have the right to vote, and you are attempting to intimidate them. You are attempting to silence them. You are attempting to interfere with their rights as parents and, yes, with their rights as voters. This is wrong. This is dangerous. And I cannot believe that an Attorney General of the United States is engaging in this kind of conduct. And frankly, I can't believe that you are sitting here today defending it. I intend to get answers to these questions. You won't answer my questions. I'm going to get answers to these questions. Mr. Chairman, we need to have a hearing on this subject. We need to hear from the Attorney General himself. He needs to come here, take the oath, sit there, and answer questions. We have never seen anything like this before in our country's history. And frankly, I want to say I think it is a dangerous, dangerous precedent.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. I want to start with a shout out to firefighters in my state, the state of Missouri. Earlier this year, in March of this year, the Forest Service began a prescribed burn in the Mark Twain National Forest down at the southeast part of my state. And it was led, this prescribed burn was led by a new all-veteran firefighting crew, which is just tremendous. There's been great reports on it throughout the state. And I think that this is a great model for what we can do. I see you nodding along, Ms. Hall Rivera. So I'm very proud of those firefighters, very proud of these vets, and proud of the model that they are, I think, showing for the rest, or setting up for the rest of the country. Ms. Hall Rivera, let me ask you about the Forest Service role in a different regard when it comes to mining approvals for essential critical minerals. Would you agree with me that critical minerals are vital to our energy security?
Yes, I would agree with that, Senator.
The International Energy Agency estimated earlier this year that lithium demand is expected to grow by 400% by 2040. Cobalt and nickel between 200 and 250% by 2040. Copper demand supposed to go up more than double by 2040. Now, here's the thing that worries me. One nation in the world is currently refining 68% of the world's nickel. Would you care to take a guess who that might be?
I would presume China.
It is China. One nation is refining 40% of the world's copper. Want to guess who that is?
I would presume the same.
It's China. One nation has 59% of the lithium and 73% of the cobalt. Want to guess?
I'm going to say China.
It's China. You've got it. It is China. So given that, would you agree with me that it's important that we do everything we can to develop our domestic critical mineral mining here in this country?
Yes, I would agree with that, Senator.
Great. Okay, then let me ask you about the Superior National Forest in Minnesota. Earlier this year, partly at the behest of the Forest Service, the Biden administration withdrew 225,000 acres of critical mineral mining in northeastern Minnesota. This is the largest reserve of cobalt and nickel in the United States, perhaps I'm told maybe even in the world, and yet your administration shut it down. Your agency recommended that it be shut down, depriving us of these minerals, making us dependent on other nations that mine them in a completely unsafe and unsustainable way, and also making us more dependent on these foreign nations. Why?
Well, Senator, I do want to say I'm not an expert on that process. That's not a part of the Forest Service that I oversee. I know we have a lot of values to balance there, especially with the Boundary Waters Wilderness area, but I'm sure that we could get back to you with more details on the specifics of that decision.
Would you? That would be helpful if you would. I would really appreciate it, because here's my view. My view is we shouldn't be making China richer and America poorer. My view is we have the best technology in the world to mine and develop these minerals. We know how to do it in a safe and responsible manner. We should be doing it. And listen, I've heard from people all over the country, but particularly people in this part of the country who have said that this decision is devastating to their region economically, but I just submit it's devastating to our energy security and our national security. And at a time when I hear from this administration, climate change, climate change, climate change, we need to have reliable, sustainable sources of energy, why would we want to tie our own hands and make us and the world more dependent on China, who've got to be the worst have the worst environmental record of any nation in the world? If they're not the worst, they got to be close. So I just don't get it, and I'd appreciate you getting back to me on that. You say that Google takes its content moderation responsibilities very seriously. That's your testimony here today. Is that fair to say? You strive to be even-handed and neutral.
Yes, we construct our algorithms to be politically neutral.
Analytically objective and apolitical, I think, were your exact words.
Exactly.
Is that
yes.
right? And you don't impose filters based on political viewpoints. That's your testimony.
That's correct.
And despite the fact that almost exclusively your executives, employees donate to one political party, I think 1% of the donations that came from Google in 2016 went to Republicans or Donald Trump. All the rest went to the other party, Hillary Clinton, the Democrats. It is your testimony that you never use content moderation to advance an ideological agenda. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator, and it's, it is both contrary to our mission, contrary to our business interest, and it would be incompatible with the systems that we build to work political bias in there, which I think is why we've had third-party studies, including the ones that I referenced, that demonstrate that we do not have political bias in
and
our product.
inconsistent with your basic values, I imagine you would say.
Inconsistent with our values.
Except for when you do it in China, right?
You're
happy to censor for the repressive authoritarian Chinese regime, like for instance with Google.cn, happy to censor away any mention of Tiananmen Square, happy to help the Chinese government maintain control of all information within the country, happy to help them control the information flow to their own citizens. You're happy to do all of that. Would you call that censorship with an ideological agenda?
Senator, we don't offer almost any of our products in China. We don't offer Google search.
Wait. Are you saying that Google CN did not include censorship tools based on what the Chinese regime asked for? Is that your testimony?
Google.
Just reminds you you're under oath now.
We have not.
Google CN did not include censorship material?
Senator, I don't know what you're
not familiar with Google CN?
I'm referencing the fact that we exited China in 2010, and we did so because Google, at that point, in addition to being under attack, we felt that the censorship requirements that were being applied to Google were not compatible with the products that we were able to.
But you did offer Google CN. You developed it, and it included censorship tools that would have screened out things like mentions of Tiananmen Square. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Senator. Are you referring to Project Dragonfly?
Oh, well, I wasn't, but because that's a separate thing. But since you mentioned Project Dragonfly, why don't you tell us about it? Is it active right now?
It's not, Senator.
You were able to say that for the record. It's not active. You've abandoned Project Dragonfly?
Yes, we've terminated that.
Are you willing to commit today here that Google will not agree to or participate in any form of censorship with the Chinese regime in China against Chinese citizens? Or will you commit to that? You will not agree to any information or restrictions on data flow in China, the Chinese market?
Senator, I'm trying to imagine hypothetically what you're referencing. We don't
thinking
provide
about
search.
Google CN, for instance.
We don't reference China's search in China. Fundamentally in China, we actually do very little today, certainly compared to any other major technology company. We really...
So you won't block search terms for Uyghurs in concentration camps or Tiananmen Square? You won't do that in any business, any venture going forward?
We don't...
No, I'm asking you won't, because we know you have in the past. That's what Google CN was. You know you've contemplated it with Project Dragonfly. I'm asking you now for a commitment. I'm glad to hear you say that Project Dragonfly has been canceled. I think that's news. So that's good to hear, because there's been news reports that it's still active. So I'm delighted to hear that.
We've been clear that we have no current plans to go into China in the search market.
That's great. So that's great. And you're committing to me here today that you will not in the future do so, and you will not engage in censorship in China. Is that
So
your
what
that's a
we are
yes or
willing,
no, actually.
what
Just
we're
yes or no.
willing to commit to, Senator, is that any decision to ever look at going back into the China search market is one that we would take only in consultation with key stakeholders,
Yeah, that's what
including
you
the
said in
US
response
government.
to Senator Blumenthal's questions about whether or not you submit to an audit. It was the longest no in the English language. Now you're not giving me a yes or a no. Are you? Let me just come back to a question that Senator Blumenthal asked I thought was interesting. You're confident that Google hasn't been infiltrated by Chinese intelligence?
We see no evidence of that, Senator.
What do you think about General Dunford, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, his comment at the Atlantic Council a few months ago that typically, I'm quoting him, typically if a company does business in China, they're automatically going to be required to have a cell of the Communist Party in that company, and that is going to lead to the intellectual property from that company finding its way to the Chinese military. Do you think he's right about that, wrong about that?
Senator, we do, as I mentioned before, barely any business in China, so I don't
Which
have
you have
really
done in
the
the
basis.
past, and you have tried to.
2010, we exited the country.
That wasn't that long ago.
10 years ago.
Okay. Well, my point is this. You've been more than willing to engage in ideological censorship in the largest market in the world. You have been more than happy to partner with the most repressive authoritarian regime on the planet, all for profits, whatever it is that is good for Google. Why would anybody believe you now when you say you won't submit to a third-party audit? You just answered Senator Blumenthal no to that. You won't commit to me that you won't engage in censorship when it suits your purposes in China and the Chinese market, for instance, in the future. Why would anybody believe you now when you say we don't ever impose an ideological agenda? What assurances can you give us?
Senator, I think what I can tell you is that in China today, we don't offer any of the products that you're referencing that would...
No, I mean here, what assurance? Why would we believe you now when you say in the United States or anywhere that you do business? Why would we believe anything Google says about what it does or does not do in terms of promoting an ideological agenda? We know you've done it in the past. We know you do it when it suits your bottom line. Why would we believe you now? What assurances can you give, besides your own testimony?
Senator, I fundamentally disagree that we're doing, that these are practices for our bottom line. I will tell you that Google has a demonstrated track record of building search engines that meet the needs of consumers here and around the world. We are a trusted brand. I don't know what answer you're looking for, but it's...
Well, what I'm looking for is a little honesty, and what I'm also looking for is some accountability. So let me give you another shot at Senator Blumenthal's question. Will you submit to an independent third-party audit about your content moderation practices?
Again, we have plenty of people looking at our content
just do- yes,
moderation
let's just say yes or
practices.
no.
The Economist just did a year-long study of our
Economist
content.
is not an independent audit. They're not
It
auditors.
was entirely independent of Google.
So is that a yes? If you're happy to do it for them, then you feel like
third parties want to moderate,
you'll open your books
want
to them? Is
to,
that a yes?
they look at
Big
us.
news we're going to make today. Is this a yes? I think we're getting to yes.
No, I'm telling you that Google's content moderation has been looked at by
So
many
sad.
third parties.
So sad. Let me ask you about YouTube, some other difficult decisions. China seems to be difficult for you. YouTube is also apparently very difficult for you. Why isn't it, what is so hard about ending the automatic referral of videos featuring minors to pedophiles? Why is that difficult? Why doesn't YouTube just do it? You know you can stop it. Why won't you just do it?
Senator, I'm not sure.
You're not familiar with this issue?
No, I'm familiar with the issue that you're referring to. Based on our policy decisions that we've made earlier this year, we have eliminated or referencing or recommending videos that contain minors in risky situations, risky conditions.
Wait, so you're telling me that you've turned off the auto, you've taken them out of the algorithm, you've turned off the auto referral, you're no longer recommending videos of minors?
Yes, not all minors. There will be situations where there's perfectly legitimate video footage containing minors, but videos that contain minors in risky conditions, we have stopped recommending those videos.
How much money does YouTube make from videos featuring children?
We don't break down money that way, Senator.
You don't know what it really, because I thought the response to the New York Times was that it would be devastating for your business model.
I don't know
You don't-
about
you
that
don't know?
reference. We don't. I can tell you that the kinds of videos that you're referencing, we have no desire to see pedophiles utilizing YouTube.
I wouldn't have thought so
or-
either.
And that's the reason why we've taken a number of steps.
How about
we
this?
have-
Will you support? You may know that I've introduced a bill that would codify this into law. Steps, it sounds like the ones you say you've voluntarily taken. So will Google support that bill that would stop any company, yours or others, from automatically referring videos featuring minors in this way?
I'd be happy to, I haven't looked at the bill, but we'd be happy to look at it. And certainly it's an area it sounds like we have a common interest in working towards a successful outcome on.
Well, it's certainly an area in which I think the American people have an interest in protecting their children, just as the American people have an interest in getting information that is free and fair, just as the American people have an interest in having their data protected,
Absolutely.
just as the American people have an interest in having companies that describe themselves as a proudly American company, those are your words.
Absolutely.
From not doing business with, sharing secrets with, or otherwise promoting the worst, most authoritarian regime on the planet, which is China. So, I'll just associate myself with the remarks of, I think, all of my colleagues here. Clearly, our trust and patience in your company and the behavior of your monopoly has run out. It has certainly run out with me, and I think it's time for some accountability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've been asked several times, I've heard the questions about your work as co-chair of the Delaware Supreme Court's Diversity Strategic Planning Steering Committee. That's a mouthful, but you've been asked about this. I just want to ask you about one thing in the report. The report talks about how important it is for the Delaware Supreme Court, I'm going to quote now, to take steps to reduce implicit bias and identity threat in the court environment. And it goes on to say that one of the things that might reduce identity threat is to get rid of the historic portraits of some of the white justices who've served on the court. Can you explain to me what identity threat is and why getting rid of portraits of judges and justices who've served on the courts would help with that?
Thank you so much for the question, Senator. I am not familiar with the term identity threat, so I don't have a definition for you. I can give you a definition of.
It's in the report, though. I mean, I'm quoting, to take steps to reduce implicit bias and identity threat in the court environment. I mean, this is your report.
Well, I understand, but one thing that I've attempted to explain is that I didn't draft the report. We had an entire committee that was creating a report to be delivered to the Supreme Court.
You signed off on it, though, didn't you?
So there wasn't a sign-off necessarily on the report.
Your name's on it, though.
I understand. I was a co-chair of the committee, but I didn't draft all the words to the report. I didn't draft the recommendations to the report. The Supreme Court is considering the report, and we haven't done anything with that particular recommendation.
So you don't know what identity threat is?
Well, I did not put those words in there, and I'm not entirely sure what whoever drafted that specific one meant by that one.
It seems kind of crazy to me, I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shogan, when you were here last year, a number of senators asked you, including me, a series of questions about articles you'd written, public statements you had made on social media that were, I have to say, pretty grossly partisan, and I thought offensive, and you and I went back and forth about it. After that, a number of us asked you questions for the record relating to these statements. I want to follow up on one of them. I, in particular, asked you to give us a full accounting of the public posts that you had made on Twitter. You had locked your Twitter account before you came before this committee. It had previously been public. I asked you to provide the public posts that had previously been available on Twitter because the ones that we have were pretty disturbing. You responded as follows, and I quote, "My personal Twitter account is comprised of posts about my mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog," end quote. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
I just remind you, you're under oath. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your Twitter posts then that I was asking you about. On February 18th, 2022, you posted on Twitter bemoaning the dropping of mask requirements for children, including those under the age of 5. Do you remember that post?
No, Senator. Those tweets were in my personal capacity.
No. I asked you, would you give all public posts that you had made on Twitter? You said no, effectively, and you said that your Twitter posts consisted of mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog. And you just told me now under oath that you stood by that. So now let's talk about your Twitter posts. On February 18th, 2022, you posted bemoaning the fact that mask requirements for children under the age of 5, one of whom I happen to have, by the way, have been dropped. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams?
My social media is in my personal capacity,
Answer
Senator.
my question, please, because you've testified under oath that you only posted about your dog and sports teams and novels, and you also said you wouldn't give this committee any of your public posts. So, is your post on February 18th, 2022, bemoaning the lifting of mask requirements for children under the age of 5, who I might just ask, all of the data has said is extremely harmful to children, these mask requirements? We'll leave that aside for now. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams? Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
Yes or no, Ms. Shogan? You are under oath before this committee, and I have to say, you have placed this issue squarely in record by repeatedly refusing to answer. Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
So you're not answering my question. Let's talk about another post. 26th of May, 2022, you talk about an assault weapons ban. Retweet a post, ban assault weapons now. Say you agree with this idea that you have to be a certain age to buy so-called assault weapons in America. Is that a post about sports teams or your dog or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post on January 5th of 2021 in which you say that Ted Cruz ought to stay in his own lane and not worry about what's going on in Pittsburgh? This is a reference, I think, to questions he had about the certification of the last election. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post, you remember December 10th, 2020, where you said that you were hoping that President Trump would have his vetoes overridden, and you agreed with the post that he was a weak policy president? Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity.
What about your post on January 5th, 2021, in which you speculated that President Trump would pardon himself next, participating in a conversation about the certification of the Electoral College? Is that a post about sports teams or mystery novels or your work at the White House Historical Association?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post? Do you remember this one? I said we seem to be having an incredible case of amnesia, but maybe you remember this one. This is from December 3rd of 2021, in which you advise an individual who goes by Meg on social media that the Library of Congress, you advise this person to complain about religious flags that have been planted on the grounds of the Library of Congress, and you say that they ought to be removed. And you go on to give this person advice about how to complain and have them removed. Do you remember that post?
My social media is in my personal
Do you remember the
capacity.
post?
My
Do you
social
remember
media is
the
in
post?
my personal capacity, Senator.
I have to say, I have been here for 4 years in the Senate. I have never seen a witness stonewall like this before. Never. And I've seen a lot. This is extraordinary. Do you remember this post? December 3rd, 2021.
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
I mean, this is unbelievable. And you want to be the archivist of the United States. You lied to us under oath. You lied to us in your QFRs. You just lied to me a second ago under oath, and now you're sitting here stonewalling, not answering questions about public posts that you've made. Are you a lawyer, Ms. Shogan?
No, Senator.
Are you familiar with the Shirtliff case at the United States Supreme Court?
No, Senator, I'm not.
Well, in that case, the Supreme Court held that, in fact, it constitutes viewpoint discrimination for a government entity to remove religious flags from its property when it's opened up the property to allow other people to put flags on it. Exactly the question that you were addressing in your public posts on Twitter. You're giving legal advice, which you're not qualified to give, directly contrary to the United States Supreme Court. I just wonder, does this have to do with your view that you wrote about that the religious right is connected to the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics? Is that why you said what you said about religious flags, that the religious right is a force for anti-intellectualism? Explain that to me.
No, Senator.
Do you stand by your comment that the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics?
Senator, that article was written, it was about how Republican presidents use common sense terminology to effectively communicate with Americans.
Yeah, in which you said that the rise of the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics. I just point out that's the article in which you say anti-intellectual, the title is Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism. Very nonpartisan. Dr. Shogun, I'm going to ask you again, will you give to this committee your public posts on Twitter? Will you make them available to this
My
committee?
social media is in my personal capacity.
Mr. Chairman, I have to tell you, this is the most extraordinary thing I have seen in my brief time in the Senate. I have never seen a witness blatantly lie under oath like Dr. Shogun has just done to this committee, stonewalled this committee, and just repeatedly refused to answer my questions about her own posts that are in public. For these reasons, I will oppose your nomination, and I strongly, strongly urge this committee to take action on this and force this witness to own up to the fact that she is misleading us right now before our eyes, Mr. Chairman.
One of our nation's top attorneys, Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, member of the Judiciary and Homeland Security Committees. And Senator, you've argued before the U.S. Supreme Court and federal and state courts. Look at that finding. Break down that report with a few short words that every American needs to hear.
Absolutely devastating, Harris. What it says is the corruption at the FBI has now become a threat to our republic. What it shows is a political campaign, that'd be the Hillary Clinton campaign, using the FBI, weaponizing the FBI, hijacking the FBI to interfere in a presidential election and to try to rig it. And Harris, they almost got by with it. They just about did it. And they absolutely succeeded in interfering with a presidency, the Trump presidency. Let's never forget the FBI lied repeatedly to a secret court in order to get wiretaps on Trump associates. We cannot allow this to go forward, and the Durham report, I think, lays the corruption bare.
Look, you've heard us say many times on this program that there are thousands upon thousands of people at both those agencies, at Justice and the FBI, who do magnificent work every day. This was leadership all the way at the top, operating dirty. Why? What's in it for them?
Oh, politics, Harris. I think what we're seeing here is liberal, radical liberal political leadership in the FBI. And also, let's be honest here, they want to call the shots in this country. I think with the Durham report, the question it really raises is, who's in charge here? You've got leadership at the FBI that wants to run presidential campaigns, that thinks that they should be able to choose who the president is. You look at what Durham uncovered, what these people were saying about Trump back in 2016, and what they were saying is this guy should never be president, and we'll do basically whatever it takes to prevent him from becoming president. Harris, that's why we have elections. Are you talking about undermining democracy? I think that's the real threat here.
Well, and let's talk about how this maybe affected an election. Because if that's why we have them, did this stand in the way?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely it did. I mean, listen, they were successful. The Clintons were successful in getting the FBI to open an investigation. They laundered that through the press. I mean, you remember all the stories in 2016, in the fall of 2016, about Russia collusion, all pushed by Hillary Clinton and then her allies in the media, all of them premised on nothing, we now know nothing whatsoever. And yet the FBI, there they are doing the investigation. There they are lying to courts. There they are surveilling a presidential campaign. So yeah, it had an effect. You bet it did. And this is a danger to our free election system to have the most powerful law enforcement body in the world interfering and intervening.
All right, I want to get to the liberal media's part in all of this, and just from your point of view, what evidence there is that they might be complicit along with the feds in all of this. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly they're complicit in the sense that they now know, and they have known for months and years now, that there was no evidence of collusion. There was no basis for this investigation. And Harris, I'm still waiting for the apologies and retractions from the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, the biggest disinformation spewers out there. When have they acknowledged that their reporting was false? You played those clips of Schiff. We could play clips of news anchor after news anchor on those outlets. When have they acknowledged? Yeah, exactly. And have you heard an apology? I haven't.
Well, and
so yeah, they're in on it.
And we didn't after the laptop you know, the whole,
Exactly.
oh, it's disinformation, it's Russia disinformation. There were clarifications and there were some acknowledgments in that case and in this one, but a full-throated, we're so sorry if we led you to believe one thing. No, definitely not. I do want to get to this because this isn't just the media, just the feds. This goes all the way to the White House. The White House press secretary with this reaction to a question on the report yesterday. We know now that then VP Biden was briefed on that FBI probe into Trump. Let's watch.
What is the White House reaction to Special Counsel Durham's report on how the FBI handled the Trump-Russia probe?
I would leave it to the Department of Justice to speak to.
Does he agree with Special Counsel Durham that there needs to be wholesale changes at the FBI?
Again, that is with the Department of Justice. That's not something that I'm going to speak from the podium. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys in Japan.
Ooh, she pretty much had roller skates on there. Your reaction?
Well, this is clearly a White House that doesn't want to fess up to the many improprieties that the president has been involved in. And yeah, you bet he knew about this. Listen, we know that both Obama and Biden were briefed and told that Hillary Clinton was trying to start this rumor, this lie that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia. They knew that. They knew it way back in the spring, early summer of 2016, and yet they still went out there and said there's no partisanship, this is not politically motivated. They knew for a fact it was politically motivated. And even worse, Harris, one of the key people who pushed this lie at the time, Jake Sullivan, Hillary Clinton's right-hand man, is now the national security advisor for the United States government working for Joe Biden. How is he still in office? How can this guy show his face? He should be removed immediately by the president.
All right, we're going to move on to this. Today on Capitol Hill, women's sports activist Riley Gaines, the former collegiate star swimmer, urging the Democrat-led Senate to pass the House Republican bill banning transgender athletes from women's and girls' sports. Let's take a watch.
I was thrust into this position, unfortunately, by being unfairly put in a competition against a mediocre male who beat every other woman in the nation, which was a heartbreaking feeling to know that we didn't matter. Our feelings, our privacy, our safety, our dignity, our mental health. But what mattered to the left was protecting the feelings of the male at the expense of our own.
And this, the Biden administration's proposal to handle the issue would make changes to Title IX. It would impose minor limits on biological males competing against actual women and girls. It would also strip federal funding from schools that institute bans. Republican lawmakers pressing the education secretary on the issue yesterday. Let's watch.
Mr. Secretary, yes or no? Does that mean that your department would take away school lunch programs for needy kids because a state or a school won't allow a boy to compete against a girl in the sports?
So going back to the civics, if I could.
I'm asking you a question. It's a yes or no question, Mr. Secretary.
I'm proud of the work we're doing to make sure that all students
Madam
feel
Chair,
safe in school.
the answer is yes.
Did he not know the answer? What was that? Senator Hawley.
Oh, he knew the answer, and the answer is absolutely yes. This is an administration that wants to erase women and the protections for women's sports. There's no other way around it. Let's tell the truth. Why? Because I think the left now has decided that there's no such thing as male or female. They've decided that women should have to accept the burden of biological men who suddenly want to be in their locker rooms, who want to compete against them. And if that means, Harris, that suddenly there are no more women's sports available, we're just supposed to accept that. Women are just supposed to accept that in furtherance of their radical left gender agenda. It's crazy stuff. Nobody supports this. Nobody. And yet here they are doing it.
Yeah, you can't pat us on the head and tell us we don't matter. We vote now. We do a lot of things now. Things have changed. They don't like change.
Joining me now is Missouri Senator Josh Hawley. Senator, we've had every major member of leadership in the House of Representatives tonight just got a message come out against this indictment and against what the DOJ has done. No one in Senate leadership, at least to my knowledge at this moment, has come out to say anything similar. The only one in the House who hasn't is Tom Emmer. He has said nothing. He's the whip there. Where are your colleagues tonight? Where are they?
Good question, Laura. Here's what I will say. If the president in power can just jail his political opponents, which is what Joe Biden is trying to do tonight, we don't have a republic anymore. We don't have the rule of law. We don't have the Constitution. Our Constitution is built on the basic rule of law and due process, and nobody should be in doubt of what's happening tonight. Joe Biden and his cronies are trying to take out their chief political opponent. This has never happened before in American history, Laura. We are in dangerous, dangerous waters, and it is because of Joe Biden.
Now, Senator, lots of commentators on some of the other networks were making the point that, oh, well, Merrick Garland and Joe Biden have never talked about this. There's no pressure being brought to bear from the White House and DOJ, totally independent. But let me tell you, remember from April of last year, the New York Times reported that Biden, quote, said privately that he wanted Mr. Garland to act less like a ponderous judge and more like a prosecutor who's willing to take decisive action over the events of January 6th. Now, that was about the January 6th issue, but they always claim that Biden's hands are clean. But clearly, Merrick Garland, if he's able to read, and he's very smart, so he does read, they know what Biden wants done here. They know what has to be done before this election takes place.
Well, this is the same group of people that said when it came to calling parents domestic terrorists that the White House had nothing to do with it. And it turns out the White House wrote the letter. The White House told DOJ, you go after the parents. You know that's what they're doing here. I don't buy for a second that the White House isn't involved in this. Of course they are. And by the way, Merrick Garland has the ultimate sign-off here. This guy isn't an independent counsel. He reports to Merrick Garland. So Merrick Garland has signed off on this, the indictment of a political opponent by a sitting president. It's just unprecedented, Laura, and I can't emphasize enough how much danger this puts our country in from the rule of law. This is banana republic stuff, and Joe Biden has led us straight there. He will do anything to hold on to power. That's the message of tonight.
And I'm just going back to, Senate leadership here. I mean, you cannot, as an office holder in the Republican Party, sit by, even if you can't stand Trump for policy reasons, personal, whatever it is. This is your moment to step forward and say, we can't allow this to continue to happen to our institutions, not to the Justice Department, the FBI, CIA, Intel. We can't continue this. Because you're right, Banana Republic, this is what Putin does. This is what Xi does. This is not what we do in our country. We have elections. Allow the election to take place. But Mitch McConnell, this is your moment, my friend. Let's hear from you tonight.
I would just say that this is not about Donald Trump, ultimately. This is about the United States of America. This is about whether the Constitution is still real in this country. This is about whether any American can expect the due process of law. And make no mistake, if Merrick Garland can send a SWAT team to the homes of pro-life Catholics to terrorize them, if he can call parents domestic terrorists, if he can jail or try to jail Biden's political opponents, he can do whatever he wants to any American. That is what this is about, and that's now what we're fighting for.
And do you also share my concern that this is a warning shot fired across the bow by the FBI and the DOJ to anyone, and Ron DeSantis, anyone like him who has more of a populist point of view, not an establishment point of view, has a real shot at the presidency? Don't get too close. Watch out. We will come for you, and we will never stop until we relentlessly pursue you until you give up. That's what I think is going on here. More than anything, I think it's about that.
Oh, it's pure power grab. It is pure power grab by the people in power, by the Biden people. And I just come back to the fact that this is an administration that will stop at nothing to silence their political opponents. They will turn the FBI on parents. They will turn the FBI on Catholic parishes and try to spy on them. They will turn the FBI on pro-life Christians. Social media companies. They will use everything they have to try and shut down political opposition, right up to indicting their chief political opponent. I mean, this is not the United States if this is allowed to stand. We cannot allow it to stand, and that's what this next election is going to be about.
Senator, do you have any confidence that Senate leadership will at least come close to expressing your frustration and deep concern about the Republic tonight?
I don't know. I can't speak for anybody else, Laura, and I've given up predicting what any other senator might do. But I can just say for myself, that I think this is a critical moment in our history as a nation, and this is the time to stand up and say we are going to fight for the rule of law.
Senator, thank you very much.